One of the women in my inflow community told me the story about her son who was at an art class that was an extracurricular art class outside of the school system because the school itself didn't officially have art in the classroom. This little boy was drawing a flower, totally, unconscious, enjoying himself, making it what he wanted to make it. And the art teacher came up to him and said, "That is not right. Why can't you draw a flower like this little girl's flower?" And he put his head on the table and stopped drawing. I was moved to tears when his mom told me the story. Luckily, she knows about intuitive art making and the thing about creativity, that there is no right way or wrong way, and she could help him to find his way back. However, moms are not always the right people to make things right, so my heart is still sore because I know that so many adults have the similar story of when they were told at a certain age, probably around 6 or 7, that they were not drawing right, and that shut them down forever. I know a lot of women as well who've told me the story that they had a parent or a sibling or both who were very creative and who always painted and drew, or one was a graphic designer, one person's father was a photographer, and they were considered the artists in the family. And this made my client believe that creativity belonged to only certain people. Only some people could call themselves artists. And you were either given this talent or you weren't. You either had it or you didn't. And these are not stories I'm hearing from women who are in their 70s and 80s. These are women who are in their 30s, which means it's still a current story, and that it's happening to a 6-year-old currently just blows my mind. I'm Brenda Laux-Johnson, and I'm your flow facilitator and guide here at Flow Drawing with Brenda. And I'm on a mission. I'm on a quest to change the world one imperfect line at a time. And before we continue, if you're new here and you want to get a little taste of what I mean, there's a link to my Doodle Playdate below that you can access. Before we really get into this, check in with your nervous system. It's something I do in all my programs because this is the place that we need to operate from in the world, being aware of our nervous systems and then noticing what we can do that will either shift it, change it, make it more adaptable so that we can be resilient and thriving in this world. So how is your nervous system today? Is it feeling frazzled? Is it calm, or is it somewhere in between? It's always good to notice and then move into the world from that place. Start noticing what excites your nervous system, what calms it down, what makes your breath increase, what makes it come down to a better, calm, relaxed, full space. This is how we can start to navigate the world and also start to recognize which things that we do, activities, thoughts, processes, actually help us and support our living. One of these practices is my flow drawing that I teach. Drawing is an accessible way for us to get in touch with our nervous systems, to change our brains, literally, physiologically, and also to decrease stress and to increase empathy. So let's explore today exactly why art making and looking at art and engaging in the arts is so good for us. And I have some real research to share with you. I'm nerd out on this stuff. I love it. That will hopefully change the role of art and art making in our current culture. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned the 4 pillars of health and that nature had become the 4th pillar next to sleep, food, and exercise. And now doctors actually prescribe those things. My husband at one point had been working really long into the morning kind of hours on his computer. And one day he couldn't actually lift his hands to get to the computer. He went to the doctor, and I have never heard before a doctor prescribe yoga and breathing as a form of prescription. Literally, he prescribed yoga and breathing as a prescription for my husband to get better because he had carbon dioxide poisoning because he was not actually breathing from the stress. Real story. And I want to share with you today the researchers the very clever people, the neuroscientists, psychologists, medical people, policymakers, and artists who are getting together to move forward and to really push for policy, medical policy, and government policy to support arts, the arts, and art making for health. I've got two of my favorite books here, written by the real experts. This one, Art Cure, by Daisy Fancourt in the UK. And this one, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us, by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. This is the science of how the arts save lives. They are giving us the reasons why creativity needs to belong next to the other pillars of health. Now it's time for creativity, which includes making art and looking at art and being involved with the arts, not just drawing, not just painting, but music, dance, singing, creating. That all becomes the fifth pillar of health, because research is showing just how necessary it really is for our mental health and for our physical health as well. Susan Magsamen actually runs the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Daisy Fancourt directs the World Health Organization's Collaborating Center on Arts and Health. So these are like real experts doing real work in this field. It's a field called neuroarts and neuroaesthetics, where they are pulling together the neuroscience and the arts and putting forward the real proof that not only is art good for us, but it's an absolute necessity for the crisis that our health system is in and for our own health as a culture going forward. One of the benefits I've read about doodling mindlessly is that it helps with memory recall and it helps to encode memory better. And so this is really helpful for learning. And there's a story here, not specifically to doodling. There is a story specific to doodling. This one is about a professor who was teaching science at a university, specifically about brain function. But what he did was he recognized the power of music to help with memory, encoding memory and information into the brain, as well as helping it to recall it. And she relates a story here about how he performed a song to the melody of Madonna's Like a Virgin, but with the lyrics relevant to the day's lesson plan about emergent cognition, a very scientific thing. And of course, she says, whether you thought it was funny or corny didn't really matter, it worked. The point is the kids laughed. Laughter is also something that helps with memory and recall, and that it also held its students' attention. And his entire lesson, his entire semester, his entire presentation of these lectures was accompanied by music, which made the students come to class because they wanted to know. They came for the music more than the information. And also he made his classes entertaining. That is another use of the arts in a classroom situation to facilitate learning and memory. I just find it fascinating when we see the proof like this of how the arts changes our brains and can really help us to function better in the world. And here's something I got really excited about when I read this in the book Written. It confirmed for me the many stories that I was hearing from the women coming to work with me. Somewhere around third grade, you most likely received the message from a teacher or other adult in your life that you couldn't be an artist if you didn't have talent, in inverted commas. And you also figured out that creativity was not as important as getting the answers correct on the endless tests in school. And how many of you can relate to that? I also want to just burst this little bubble around this fantasy idea and romantic notion that people may have about artists, that they have these beautiful studios, sunlit and gorgeous, with white walls, and everything is laid out sort of to be Instagrammably perfect. That's just not real. It's just not how it is. And now, in case you're interested in the state of my studio, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned the mess. I have since tidied up. It's funny how motivation works like that. When you tell someone about something, it actually motivates you to make a change or do the thing you said you're going to do. I did have a transformed studio, although anyone looking at it might not think so. Because My studio is constantly a work in progress. I'm in it all the time, moving around it, filming from different angles. I'm working at a table, then I'm working at a canvas, then I might be working over there on a little small salt drawing. So everything moves and shifts and changes all the time. And for me, I find this a reflection on life and a reflection on myself and my brain and how it works. But it's also the reflection of how an artist in reality works. And I tell you this because this whole belief that we have about what creativity is and isn't, and who gets to be an artist and who doesn't, needs to change. Let's set aside the art world and the artist with a capital A. That's a career. That's what people do for a living. And that is a different sector. But in everyday life, each of us is an artist, and it is necessary for us to recognize this and to work with it intentionally so that we can be more healthy as individuals, and that then that ripples out to society, to our communities, and into the world. And this is how I believe we make the world a better place if everyone took a line for a walk every day. So my lens comes in through the action of drawing, taking a line for a walk on a piece of paper. But there's many ways to do it. Susan Magsamen goes on to tell the story of art to life creator Nicholas Wilton, who you may have come across on social media. And he is on a mission to reconnect people to their creativity, which is the same thing I'm doing too. And he says here that his students tell him that they carry the creativity unleashed in his classes into the rest of their lives, whether that's in how they parent or work, or how they garden or cook. And Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross go on to say creativity is, put simply, the ability to imagine and come up with original ideas and solutions, which makes it one of humankind's most valuable skills, a skill that we all possess and use every day, even if we don't realize it. So here's the real support of everything I've been saying. And back to that romantic notion of what an artist is and what creativity is. It is not just waiting for inspiration to arrive or to be inspired by the muse. It is actually a cognitive process. It is a thing we can do with our brains and choose to practice creativity. Yes, increasing evidence from psychology and neuroscience experiments indicates that creativity requires cognitive effort. And then she goes on to say we need to develop rituals to rewrite our inner script. Because we need to change the habits, we need to change the beliefs around what we think is creativity is, what arts is, and our routines create neural pathways, and we need to create habits that change and shift those. And I love this quote. It's been one of the quotes that really changed my life, literally, fundamentally, when I had this realization, as Annie Dillard wrote, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. Sit with that. How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. How much creativity are you putting into your life consciously? How much creating and creative input and output are you feeding into your brain consciously so that you can open up to more possibilities, so that you can give your brain space for mind wandering, which is so good for it, to disrupt that incessant productivity, optimizing, doing, functioning treadmill that so many of us are on. When do you give your brain space to just allow it to be creative? It's a habit that we have to make space for. And practice and repetition rewire our brain. Our repeated patterns can help our brains to be agile, to conserve energy, and to flourish. I love those words. Agile, conserve energy. Who doesn't want to conserve energy? And flourish, like flowers. Or they can keep us stuck. So practice and repetition can keep us stuck. Remember that. And they can help us to flourish. We need to be conscious, aware, and train ourselves and practice when we are in one or the other. Are we flourishing and being agile, or are we stuck in a routine that no longer serves us? So before I read the whole book to you and then start on the next one and bore you to tears, I'll tell you that I actually met Susan Magsamen here in Seattle when she came here at the invitation of an organization called Path with Art. And what I wanted to show you is that the research is real. And between her research and Dr. Daisy Fancourt's research, there is such a lot of growing evidence in this field of neuroarts that is showing how the arts, engaging in it, making it, changes our brain connectivity, lowers our cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And Dr. Daisy's work measurably shows the improvement in things like depression, anxiety, chronic pain, and loneliness. And so this means that making art and being involved in the arts, by looking at it, taking it in, beholding, as Susan Magsamen uses that word, it actually is medicine. It is no longer something we can think that belongs to other people or is just a nice to have luxury thing that we do on the side. It's medicine. And I know this myself because I've always used art making as a way for me to process what's going on in the world. It's a way for me to come back to my center. I've been doing it since I was little, but I didn't know what I was doing at the time. And I realized that it's what I always come back to regulate myself. It's helped me to navigate and understand and move with my depression and my anxiety and real heartache that I've experienced in my life, to move through it, to move with it. And a full disclaimer here, I do take medication. I take antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication because it's a thing I've lived with for so long and used many ways to navigate it. So there's not to say that art is the panacea for all conditions. It is not a replacement for medical help, but it goes a long way to assisting and supporting what you get. The medicine is also not necessarily a fix-all either. What I'm finding so exciting is that as researchers of brain science discover more and more possibilities of the brain and the interconnectedness of different parts of the brain, that it's not one part just working in isolation, and as explorations into mind-body health, the connection between the brain and the body, and how it's all a system that affects everything. So one thing affects another thing. It also, for me, reflects what goes on in our healing, in that it's many things that add to our healing, as it can be many things that add to our damage and our hurt or our wounds or our sickness or our illness or our pain. It's just not dry cut. It's just not this or that. It's not a black and white story, and it's not a black and white solution. And the thing about creativity, and especially exploring it in the way that I teach it, with intuition, shows us on the paper right in front of us what we are experiencing in life. And it opens our minds to noticing and really viscerally understanding that everything is nuanced, everything is complex and interwoven, and that there's no right way and there's no perfect answer, and there's definitely no perfect way of being in the world. And that for me has been a huge relief. And that's another story for next week. Let's get back to Path with Arts. Path with Arts is an organization in Seattle who have for years, I think about 20 years, run arts programs in the city center with adults who are recovering from homelessness, addiction, trauma-related illness. They see the positive results of art making on individuals with serious conditions every single day. And so Susan Magsamen and the Arts Mind Lab from Johns Hopkins wanted to measure the success and the results, and then create from that a program that can be implemented and replicated in other cities in Washington and across the country. The results they showed were significant. There was better sense of mental well-being. People felt less lonely because they were connecting with other people, but also they were connecting with themselves. And it improved their self-efficacy, which I find such an interesting outcome. It made them have agency, or feel like they had more agency and control over their thinking and over their lives to function better in the world than when they didn't do the art making. And this brings to mind one of my participants in my inflow space. She said she feels like she has more agency over her life and more self-acceptance. And this is huge. If someone who's lived with all of this uncertainty and mental health concerns for so long to suddenly feel like they have self-esteem, agency over their life, and self-acceptance. That's a dramatic, real change, life-changing transformation. And so Path with Art have this real data that they are using to bring actual arts prescribing policy to cities in Washington state, so that a doctor could prescribe art classes as medicine for a person's pain, loneliness, mental health. In the same way, they would possibly prescribe physiotherapy. Imagine that. And it's already happening elsewhere in other parts of the world. For example, in the UK, they call it social prescribing, where doctors are already prescribing art classes and art making and engaging in the arts as a prescription instead of or alongside medication. And one program called Art Lift showed a 37% drop in GP visits and a 27% drop in NHC spending for the people who went through this. And this is where a health system is now benefiting from the arts, less spending. Isn't that interesting? And so why, on the flip side of that, do we have education systems cutting the arts from the classrooms in kids' education? Still, and certainly in the US, since the focus became more on maths and science, funding has been cut for the arts in schools. And I don't know where else it's happening, but I know that there's really not a focus on it, and the STEM subjects are pushed. Although there's a lovely organization called STEAM, I'm remembering, STEAM, which is putting the A back into the STEM for arts. That's exciting too. I will research that and bring you more on that in another episode. But so what we're noticing is not a coincidence, it's a pattern, and it's happening everywhere, that arts are less and less important. So we take the creative thinking away from the children we're educating, and then as they grow up, we want to feed it back to them because it's been lost. Reality is, in a science classroom and in innovation and in creating solutions for our challenges in our world, we need creative thinkers to be making the innovations for the good of the planet, not the creative thinkers who want to do it for personal profit and gain, dare I say, flying rockets to Mars. But we want people who are doing things like the coral gardeners of the world, who are growing little bits of coral in nurseries and then putting it into the ocean, and have discovered that more coral grows when it hears the sounds of coral, live coral. It has this like clicking sound. And so they've started putting in sound boxes on the deep floor of the ocean that sounds like coral that's alive, so that more coral will grow. I mean, that's just phenomenal. And that doesn't come from just research. It comes from imaginative thinking, creative solutions, cognitive thinking next to creative inspiration. And so the brain there is working in all these ways. And if you want to call it the brain, it's different people in an organization or different people from different fields coming together to find these beautiful creative solutions to help the world thrive. And we need more of that, but we need it to be starting at school level, letting these kids be completely free in their creative imagination and believing in their creativity and believing that art is not just something on a wall in a museum. So I think I've made my point for why creativity should become the fifth pillar of health in our world. And as I said in my TEDx talk, we know now that the arts, beholding and engaging in it or making it and creating it, has proof that it decreases our stress. And I'm sure you've experienced that. Whatever it is you do that's creative, you know that it does something for you on a visceral level. And in your mind, it slows down a little, which brings down the cortisol, the stress hormone. It also increases dopamine. It gives us a dopamine fix and lights up good positive parts of our brain. It also makes space and increases our empathy by making us recognize that there are so many more possibilities than just one way. And next week I'll share in my story how I used to be someone who thought there was only one way to think, to do things, to make art, and how much I've changed. And why I have this radical theory that the world could be a different place, a better place, if everyone took a line for a walk every day, is that when people make and create quietly and privately with themselves, something shifts inside them. They get less perfectionistic. They get more open to seeing the possibilities. And they're different then when they interact with their close ones, with their work colleagues, with people out in the public. And that then has a ripple effect. We know this. And so I want to invite you to come and take a line for a walk. If you want to get my dual play date down below, or maybe perhaps it's time for today's line as we end off today's episode. At the end of every episode, I invite you to just sit quietly and watch me draw a completely spontaneous drawing, just beginning with taking a line for a walk. It can go any way. Who knows where it will be today? So let's move over to my drawing table. Here is today's line. I'm going to be using a piece of old brown packing paper. I love drawing on this. And look, there's a whole lot of little wrinkles that I can just follow. I don't even have to think. And it feels very yummy. Listen to the sound. Watch to the end of the video to see how this unfolds. And as I'm drawing, I am following the energy of the paper and what wants to come out of my hand. And now I'm starting to see shapes that I'm quite enjoying making, and I want to make more of them. And let me know in the comments what this is doing for your nervous system as you watch me creating. What does it feel like to watch some slow flow drawing? What would it feel like to make some slow flow drawing yourself? I've got a free practice for you to try called Permission to Doodle, and the link is below. And if you want to go further than one video, I'm opening the waitlist for the next Flow Drawing Adventure 2, and the link is below for that as well. It's going to be a wonderful one. The actual making feels good. What would it feel like for your nervous system and your brain if you had no expectation of an outcome and no need to be perfect or get it right? How would that feel? I will see you next Wednesday for Flow Drawing with Brenda, and go and take an imperfect line for a walk now so we can make the world a better place. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I'll see you soon.